Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to this classroom session. It's the book launch of Ground Sea by Kanthy Peng. So I would first introduce myself. My name is Michael. I'm from Day Editions. So we are a publishing house based in New York and Beijing. So our focus is the intersection between contemporary art, humanities, and cultural anthropology. So we started in 2021 with an annual bilingual magazine, and in 2023 we start to work very closely with individual artists to develop their works into an artist book. So Ground Sea actually marks our fourth artist book, and it's also Kenthy's first ever artist book. So we really like to take this opportunity to share this book with you guys. So a little bit more about the background information of Ground Sea. So it kind of primarily explores Kenthy's own depression, but within a wider social context, and also kind of reflecting on her family issues and also political issues. So it kind of carries Kenthy's photography work for over 10 years. So it's just not only just one series, but rather photos taken in different places at different times, and they belong to different series. So today we will also have Muxi, our designer of Ground Sea, to join us online from Beijing. So she's from company Perform, and I know it's very late in Beijing right now. It's like 4 a.m. So thank you, Muxi, for joining us at this early time. And there's actually a very interesting connection between three of us, because I actually met Kenthy in 2014 at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where we both studied photography. And after that, Kenthy went to Yale to continue her master's degree for photography, and that's where she met Muxi. So I think it's kind of like a fate for us to be here together today to share this book that we worked over for more than a year. So I'll hand over to Kenthy to talk about her concept behind this book, and Muxi is going to share a little about the design, and then we'll open up for the audience. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for the introduction. Today, I'd like to share the background of this book, Ground Sea, how it came together, the themes that run through it, and how I reimagined works from different projects into something entirely new through the medium of a book. Later, I'll hand things over to Muxi, whose design decisions are just as important to the themes of this book as the images themselves. At the end of 2021, I moved to San Diego after finishing a residency in the Netherlands. My partner had just started learning to surf, and I would drive her to a beginner-friendly beach in La Jolla. She would change into her wetsuit, grab her board, and walk towards the ocean, where I went off to find parking. On good days, I could find a spot on the uphill road not too far away. I liked sitting in the car, watching her reflection in the side mirror. The shape of that mirror reminded me of a 2x3 camera frame. Within it, I could see surfers in the distance, the golden hour sun setting behind them, and a warning line: objects in mirror are closer than they appear. It felt like a still from a disaster movie, an eerie calm before the storm. That frame inspired my first project in California, Objects in Mirror. I worked with 3 actresses based in San Diego, inviting them to reenact a folktale from Iwate Prefecture in Japan. The story was recorded after the 1896 tsunami in Sanriku, and later included in the folklore collection Tono Monogatari. In the story, a man walked along the coast one night, and encounters the ghost of his wife and her lover, both of whom had died in the tsunami. He chases after them, begging her to come back to him, but she only cries before disappearing into the darkness. Only the next morning does he realize she was a ghost. San Rico and Southern California share a similar geological reality. Both sit on the Pacific Ring of Fire, making them vulnerable to seismic disasters. For me, to reenact this tale from afar was also a kind of rehearsal, a premonition, perhaps, a disaster still to come. The triangular relationship among the three figures in these images also becomes a metaphor for the entanglement of past, present, and future. I used a split diopter lens, a technique often seen in 70s and 80s Hollywood cinema, to keep both foreground and background in sharp focus. In still photography, it creates a surreal, even unsettling effect. I also introduced repetition to disrupt the linear narrative. The three actresses played each role repeatedly until they could no longer tell who was supposed to be whom. The strong and high contrast lighting, tightly framed compositions, and heightened expressions all give the images a staged, almost melodramatic quality. On one hand, this approach mirrors the way contemporary media tends to stage disasters as spectacle. On the other hand, it highlights a lingering sense of anxiety. When I decided to include this series in the book, I faced a choice. I could either build the book around this project as a focused reflection of a particular research, or I could take a more selfish approach, treating it as a fragment of my lived experience and setting it alongside works from different moments in my practice. In doing so, I hope to piece together a puzzle. What have I consistently avoided in my work, even though it's shaped so much of who I am? I spent 2 months going through my works, and I kept finding the same motifs. An immovable rock, a motionless woman, a group of people imagining a better future, yet stuck in place. The answer became clear. I wanted to make a book that confronts my own depression. Right before the pandemic, I worked in a small town in upstate New York. My commute from Brooklyn took 2 hours each way. Subway to Manhattan, transfer to Grand Central, then a train north. Later, I started driving to save some time. The fastest route was I-95, and once I got through the White Stone Bridge traffic, I would be home. But strangely, it wasn't the traffic I feared the most. It was the nights when the road was completely clear. I don't remember when it started, but I began to struggle with the overwhelming urge to swerve off the bridge. I had to grip the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers went numb and cold. My vision blurred with tears and sweat, but I didn't dare let go to wipe my tears. I had to keep repeating to myself, I'm a daughter who must care for her parents. I'm a partner who must show up. I'm an artist who must contribute something meaningful. I honestly didn't believe any of those at that moment. But these were the fragments I clung to keep myself from disappearing. Around the same time, my mother, who had just retired, was also diagnosed with depression. So was my younger cousin, who had to drop out of high school because of it. In the East Asian culture I grew up in, mental illness is taboo. seeing a psychiatrist is considered shameful, almost an insult. I still don't fully understand what that means for 3 generations of women in the same family to be diagnosed with depression. I remember my mother, who I wasn't speaking too much then, crying on the video call and said, "I can't open my bedroom curtains anymore." 6 months later, she told me with excitement that the medication was working, that her doctor said she was cured. I asked how she knew. She said, "Even when I watch the news now, it all feels far away. I don't get caught up anymore." She asked me to help get my cousin. What she didn't know was that my cousin was going through exactly what I had once endured, a kind of struggle that society has no place for, one that is literally a censored term online. I've often wondered, what is the difference between numbness and depression? What remains when the news is silenced, protests suppressed, and state power so overwhelming that going numb and moving on becomes a survival strategy? However, depression is different. It carries a constant agitation, a restless intensity. In Guangxi, I want to return over and over again to this tension of being stuck, yet somehow still in motion. The book is therefore structured into 2 tightly interwoven chapters. The first is titled Sunset Watchers, composed of still photographs that freeze moments of movements. The second is called Kwafu Chasing the Sun, and consists of videos transformed into stills. Together, they reflect 2 sides of the depressive states: a paralysis born of excessive introspection, and a surge of agency born from refusal to move on. Between the 2 chapters lies a set of images that blur the boundary between photography and videos, a liminal state between action and inaction. This section documents my father's life after retiring from the Chinese People's Liberation Army. He moved into a Buddhist temple, where he now chants, rings bells, and manages over 1,000 keys. In China, Communist Party members, retired or not, are not allowed to publicly practice religion. So I only photographed his back, a visual strategy often used in documentaries about closeted individuals. But what interests me more is what his back stands for, which is a force that propels someone forward. That force might be beliefs. Belief in communism, belief in religion, belief in the promise that hard work leads to a better life, belief in linear progress, belief in the idea that history unfolds as it should. And when those beliefs collapse, one ceases to move. If believing in what is told makes life easier, then why is it so hard to believe? Why do we refuse? And with my own inability to believe, how can I possibly get my cousin to hold on to hers? This book's title, Guangxi, comes from a term used by the indigenous people of the Caribbean. Anthropologist and feminist Emily Martin borrowed it to describe what she witnessed while observing clinical case conferences on affective disorders. A Guangxi refers to a swell of the ocean, which occurs in calm weather and without obvious cause, breaking on shore in heavy, roaring billows. A distant storm, out of sight, is often the cause of a Guangxi. Through this book, I hope a depressed body, a depressed emotion, and a depressed struggle can become a kind of receiver, a sensor that registers and amplifies the storm before it arrives. In these times, defined by a failure of imagination, our bodies, or emotions, and or struggles may carry the truth that society works hard to conceal. To remind us that the future isn't always a matter of linear progress, not a single road forward. What we need to believe is the possibility of an alternative. I want to thank Michael and Coco, the two editors at Dai Editions, who invited me to begin this project in the summer of 2023. It took nearly 2 years, through many complications in China's independent publishing scene, for Guangxi to come into being. They support my conceptual vision throughout it all, and I'm deeply grateful. This book was designed by Muxi, a dear friend from graduate school. Even though we don't see each other often, every time we meet, just a few words are enough to bring us to tears. She just gets me, even the most abstract and unspoken ideas. I honestly cannot imagine anyone else who could have understood and translated the emotional intensity of this project so deeply. And now I'd like to hand it over to Muxi.
Hi everyone, this is Muxi Gao speaking from Beijing. I'm the designer of Guangxi and also the founder of an independent design practice called Company Perform. After hearing Kanthy speak, it's hard not to feel the emotional weight this book carries. As a designer, my role was not to interpret or decorate her story, but to hold it, to build something that could carry all of that complexity with care and precision. I'd like to start with a memory. The last time I met Kanthy in person, it was at this small cafe in Beijing, filled with loud, chaotic electronic music. Not the most obvious place for intimacy, but somehow it became exactly that. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years. She talked about her life and work, the joyful parts, the difficult ones. I remember holding her hands as she spoke. They were warm and soft, but also steady, like there was a quiet strength moving underneath. We had crumbled tissues in our palms from drying our tears, but I didn't want to throw mine away because I needed both hands to keep holding hers. And somehow I felt that the tighter I held on, the more I could be present for her, even across distance and time. That moment stayed with me. It was incredibly physical, not in a dramatic scene, but in a quiet, grounded way. And so when Dai Editions invited me to design this book, I returned to that feeling. I asked myself, how can a book hold someone the way I was trying to hold her hand? The design of Guangxi begins there, with a desire to make intimacy and fragility tangible. The book was built as a wave-like structure, rising and falling like breath, like emotion, through visual rhythms, intermissions, and density shifts. These weren't just aesthetic gestures, but attempts to mirror the texture of being overwhelmed, or of being suspended between stillness and motion. And one question I kept asking myself was, what does weight feel like? Not just in the sense of heaviness, but also in its lightness, the way grief can make you float above yourself, or how numbness can feel weightless, unmoored. In the structure of the book, I try to reflect both the gravity of experience and the airness of dissociation. Heavier papers come after moments of transparency, and tight spreads are followed by soft fades. It's a choreography of weight. felt lifted, then return again. The core idea in this book is the physicality of depression, not just of the clinical symptoms, but how it feels in the body, the weight, the fog, the moments of collapse, and the unexpected flashes of clarity. To respond to that, I created a few small illustrations, like this rose. They were based on Kanthy's own work and felt like soft gestures, not so much embellishments, but moments of quiet presence. Designing became, for me, a way to stay in dialogue with her images, to speak back not with words, but with form. Text in Guangxi is also treated as image, a visual material. Much of the writing is poetry, so instead of typesetting it in a conventional way, I let the text drift, stack, break, or bend, responding to its rhythm. These shaped text echo the way emotions loop and collapse when you are deep inside them. They form visual syntax for thoughts that feel tangled, fragile, or cyclical, a way to show meaning even when language fails. The poems are printed on sheer paper, and their mirrored reflections fall onto the other side of the page. This wasn't just a visual trick. It was meant to evoke echo, reverberation, and perhaps even inheritance. It quietly echoes what Kanthy spoke of, the way emotion travels across generations or lingers long after, after its original moment. And these translucent layers also slow the reader down, gently disrupting the flow, asking you to pause, to notice what's beneath. This slow fading continues into the folios, the page numbers. They start visible, then gradually fade as the book progresses, eventually disappearing altogether. This visual dissolve also suggests a loss of orientation, both spatial and emotional. This spread shows a photograph that first appears in a pale, almost fading form, a ghost of an image. You barely see it, almost like a memory trying to surface. This shows how the idea of density became central to my design thinking. I started treating everything, text, image, even white space, as something that exists along the spectrum of density. Here the same image reappears on the next page, now printed at full opacity. Its weight returns. Its presence becomes undeniable. This pairing from pale to full was designed to simulate how a memory, a mood, or a symptom intensifies in the body. Repetition here isn't for emphasis, it's for uncertainty, a way to say, you've seen this before, but you are seeing it different now. In this way, text becomes image, and image becomes physical matter, and between them lies the space of perception, or misperception. That in between is where the experience of depression often lives. All of these design gestures, echo, illustrating, layering, fading, repetition, are woven into a broader cinematic structure. On this spread, there's a passage written by Kanthy, reflecting on Walter Benjamin's reading of Paul Klee, the figure of the tourist, the impossibility of linear time, and how a single gesture, the V sign, can become a spectral signal from both future and past. Quote, those who are depressed cannot be more than familiar with the aforementioned. A photograph from the future prophesies my clicking of the shutter in that moment, unquote. When I read that, I felt an uncanny parallel to what the book itself was trying to do, not to explain depression, but to let it radiate, through gesture, image, and material. And the book cover is a reinterpretation of Klee's Angelus Novus, the angel of history, reimagined here as a middle-aged man in motion. The book ends on a long sequence of images of Kanthy's father running toward a vanishing point. This section and the book as a whole does not close with resolution but with motion, a longing for something unnamed, something barely held but never quite let go. It's not a conclusion but a continuation, a quiet insistence that even without belief, the body still moves. Thank you so much for listening. Designing this book was an act of deep trust. Much of it was made in silence, not because we didn't talk, but because they don't need explaining. And even now in front of you, I think this book speaks most clearly not through my voice, but through its own material presence. So I hope you will spend time with it, hold it, and maybe let it hold you back. Thank you.
Thank you, Muxi. Thank you for the designs, explanations. And so before I open up questions for the audience, I want to ask maybe like 2 questions to Kanthy about the things that we didn't really talk about in the book. So there are like actually 2 poems in the book and also an artist writing. And I think like our book, The Ground Sea, is kind of different than the traditional or like conventional photo books because of like the design and the sequencing. We did a lot of experiments. So maybe now we can move to talk about like the poems, which I think they played a really important role in this book. And I know the poems are from a young poet called Geng Yao, who's based in China, and she also have a small publishing house. So like one of the poem was pre-existing, while the other one was commissioned specifically for this project. And I was always intrigued by kind of like these collaborations because I think your photos is also really poetic. So maybe you can talk a little bit about like the relationship between your photos versus the poem, and also like how did the commission poem came about? Like, does it meet your expectation? Maybe you can kind of extend it on it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in this book, there are 2 poems written by poet Geng Yao. And I actually didn't know Geng Yao personally before this collaboration. I just browsed online and encountered a poem by her called The Small Town Swot. And it immediately struck me. The small town swot is a buzzword on Chinese social media that literally refers to someone who come from small towns and manage to move into bigger cities because they're outstanding academically. However, they still struggle to fit in because they couldn't seem to figure out all the unspoken social rules that are inherent in middle and upper class. So for me, it's an incredibly cruel term. I found it resonate not only because my parents, my father and mother, are both small town swots, but also it kind of mirrors my own experience immigrating to a Western foreign country, and that constant anxiety and awkwardness of feeling that no matter how hard I try, I would never be able to fit in. So anyways, I told their editions and said that I would like to invite Geng Yao to collaborate on this project. We got her permission to use the small town SWOT, and we also commissioned her to write a new poem dedicated to the images, the book of this project. So after a few months, when we received the new poem, the name is Plum, I noticed that at the footnote, she said that this poem is written in memory of a friend of her who committed suicide 10 years ago at a very young age. So I asked her about the information of this friend, and it turns out that it was also a friend of mine. And I actually, when I was making this book, this friend, her name was someone that constantly come to my mind. And I keep thinking about the last time when I saw her. It was 10 years ago, when she was pretty actively involved in a depression mutual aid group in China. And she basically just dragged me out of my bed and forced me to go out and exercise and run with her. So on some level, I feel like I'm sitting here now because of that run. And it just feels very surreal to see that Geng Yao wrote something in memory of her after seeing my works without knowing that we had this mutual connection. So this collaboration just unfolds in the most unexpected but meaningful way, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess the other question is like more general, like because when we publish books, we also kind of place ourselves to a position that we are like a general audience who has zero knowledge to the practice, to the previous works by you. So like, so I guess for this question, I'm coming from like a person who hasn't seen our work, or like a person who doesn't read a lot of like photo books. So I mean, like for someone like that, how should they interpret you like with your work, or like how do you want them to get involved with this book?
Yeah, I would say this is a very personal project for sure. Honestly, now that even the book has already been published, every time I open it, I still feel incredibly vulnerable because I feel part of me is being exposed. Not in the sense that I'm exposing my body or exposing my mental illness, but in the sense that I'm exposing the most messy, chaotic side of mind, how the mind working of me. So I honestly don't have any expectations or expectations for how the audience should interpret this book, because I just cannot. But I would say maybe try not to logically decode the relationship between the images and text or among the images, because they're not led by logic. Instead, just let the images, the symbols, the text, the design decisions to take you to wherever that leads to. And I hope that ends up at somewhere that is more effective and emotional rather than intellectual. Yeah. And another suggestion I would have is I think it would be nice to take this book to like under different lighting situations, because some of the images or like designs might resist on revealing themselves under certain lighting, but decide to open them up under another lighting. So yeah.
Okay, so I guess now it's time, like if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask like Kanthy or Muxi about like the concept or the design. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So for the first part, which is mostly photographs, it is mostly led by one specific series, which is the objects in mirror, so three women. And I'm kind of treating it like a kind of period or commas, and in between of that, then for example, like there's a moment that one of the women jump into kind of nothingness, and then like that leads to like a memory. So and then that transits from black and white to color, and then like there is a black tunnel that kind of like indicate like how the memory could disrupt, disorient and messy, and then like that's her, the same person reappear again. That kind of bring us back to. So I would say that's like the sequence is less. I didn't consider the sequence solely on like the formal decisions, but kind of thinking about them almost like clips of a film. Yeah, and for the second part, it is a very long sequence of the stills, and that is a beautiful design by Muxi. She just decided to make it start with very, very subtle running moves, and then like slowly get smaller and smaller and smaller until it fade away. So yeah, for me, that's also a very beautiful gesture of sequence. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a question for Kanthy and Muxi. So I see during the collaboration process, it has been, it seems very interesting for me that, like on one page you have like a half image and then when you turn, there's like a really like a couple of portraits. And then also there's the illustration that's based on the photograph. So my question was that, is that, with this kind of collaboration, do you have like disagreements? Like, is there anything that you don't agree on how to present, and then how to resolve that?
Muxi, do you want to answer that question?
Disagreements?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, the now version or the final version of the design was a result after many rounds of discussion, and I've had several versions of design before this one, and I think each one of them had sort of a very different approach in terms of I guess the core idea was always the same, like using physicality or the ideas of layering, fading, and all that. But the approach, like how I illustrated, how I conduct design on it, was very different. So I think among all these versions, we had a lot of discussion on which way or which approach should we go on. So I think that was what I can remember in terms of disagreement. But once we kind of all agreed on this, I guess, style maybe, I don't know, like, because I was trying on different illustrations. Once we decided on that, it was like moving, it was moving very smoothly. And one specific thing that I could think of in those discussion was, I remember there was a moment where I was trying to make illustrations of the letters of Grancy, as you can see now on the cover. And one version of it was kind of, how would I say it, like kind of the letters were more distorted or like shaking kind of feeling. And when I present that to Kanthy, she immediately said, it's very cool, those letters, but I kind of feel like they were made by eel hands, or like, sort of when you are not in a healthy state. It kind of suggested a clinical situation. So that was the moment that hit me. I realized that she really does not want any hint of pathological reading of depression in the book. And so that was, I guess, a turning point for me to make illustrations with more conscious and to avoid any pathological understanding of depression, but more focusing on the physicality sense and like other things that we're trying to focus here.
Yeah, and I can just add on that the same, also with the cover, I remember the first round of design, Muxi actually presented us like 2 layers. So there is a cover and there is a, what is called, like a cover outside the cover, like a soft cover with transparent paper. And most of the text were printed, the title is printed on that. But we kind of came with this agreement that we saw this orange, and especially when you feel the cover of it, it have a very smooth, warm feeling that we really don't want to add another layer to it. So that was a hard discussion with Muxi because it's obvious that Muxi really, really liked the original design. But eventually she's like, oh yeah, we can also try with this newer design, just move all the elements from the extra cover to the same layers of the cover. And it actually turns out, I think it turns out great because after printing on this paper, it turns out that these letters are actually showing up like different, depending on where the light hit on it, it shows the kind of shimmer, shining effect that we didn't expect at all. So I think that is just a happy result that came like from a disagreement, but eventually ends up really nice. Yeah.
Yes, please.
You mean the like intentional? Yeah, it's kind of the both. For example, the 3 women, the series of that, yes. So that is a obviously staged series, and I intentionally make it like looks very theatrical and almost melodramatic, because I want to emphasize that the kind of overreacting part, because I kind of think about like how people always react to me, like when, or depressed people saying that, oh, you're overreacting, you're being like too dramatic, etc. So I was kind of trying to mimic that. And in other photos that I made, most of my photos are all on some level staged. I came, for example, I would have an image, yeah, like this one actually is like someone running outside, trying to break the frame. And I just had that urge, like one day when I saw an art exhibition, I'm like, oh, this work seems so depressing to me, and I really, really want to make a work that feel like that energy of trying to run out of it. And that was where it came from. So that more comes from like a emotional aspect, and then like the imagery, like the actual image comes later. Yeah. That feels like a critique now. No, no, no. Uh, I think I would say the intertwined relationship between my still image part of practice and my moving image part of practice, for sure. Because before making this book, I always felt like these are 2 separate practices. I'm thinking, okay, this year I'm going to make 1 video work and like some photographs, or next year I'm gonna focus on my photographs and like things like that. But making this work, especially like conceptualize what does that mean, like for example, the first part, like photographs, like being unable to move, right, but still have that urge, energy, versus the second part that are moving images, but what does that movement means, like where that leads to, right? I think that really, for me, put these two set of practice together. And I think moving forward, that would also be the direction I would like to keep pursuing. Yeah. Yes, that's the goal.
Okay, thank you guys. So we actually have a signing, like a book signing by Kanthy around like 3 p.m. at our table at D21. So if you want to make more conversations or have more questions regarding the book, please stop by our table.